Greetings, booktubers, and welcome back to Grammaticus Books. Welcome to a celebrity deathmatch edition of Grammaticus Books, and I think this is the third one that we've done. So if you don't know how the celebrity deathmatch works, we take two celebrities. This can be two fantasy artists such as Boris and Frank Frazetta, or it can be two colossi in their field of fiction such as Isaac Asimov and Robert A. Heinlein. We throw them into the Octagon, we pit them head to head, and we see if one of them is a clear winner, if one of them is clearly better than the other, at least in my opinion. And it's just for fun. And today we're putting into the Octagon Uhtred of Bebbanburg and also Colonel Richard Sharpe of the 95th Rifles Regiment. Now, these are both fictional characters by the author Bernard Cornwell, who specializes in historical fiction. Uhtred of Bebbanburg is from the Saxon Tales, that whole series of books. And Colonel Richard Sharpe actually starts off as a private, is from the Sharpe series, where he follows the career of Sir Arthur Wellesley, the Duke of Wellington, during the Napoleonic Wars. And we're going to throw these two characters, these two series of books into the Octagon. They're both best-selling series, and see if one of them comes out a clear winner. One of them comes out as much more enjoyable, much more of a better written series than the other, stands head and shoulders above the other series. And I think the answer to that question is yes, one does, even though they're both great. I love both of these series of books. Bernard Cornwell is one of the best historical fiction authors out there, and his Saxon Tales is enormously popular. It's a best-selling series, as is his Richard Sharpe series. I've read all of them, of both of the series. I enjoy both of them. I highly recommend both of these series of books, but I do think that one of them is better than the other. So let's start into it. Let's jump right into it with both feet. And in the left corner over here in the Octagon, weighing in at 250 pounds and standing 6 feet 4 inches tall, is Uhtred of Bebbanburg. So Uhtred is the main character in the Saxon Tales. And the Saxon Tales is basically 13 books written by Bernard Cornwell, sort of following the historical events of the Viking invasions of England in the late 800s in England, of course. And it's really following the career of Alfred the Great up to his death and then slightly after his death, but as seen through the eyes of Bernard Cornwell's fictional character, Uhtred of Bebbanburg, who he weaves in and out of these historical tales, these historical events of Alfred the Great and the Vikings. And it's a very, very well done series. I enjoyed it very much. There are 13 books. He started writing them in 2004 with the initial book here, The Last Kingdom. And it's called The Last Kingdom because the Vikings invade England in the 800s, and they take out the English kingdoms one by one until there's only one left, the Kingdom of Wessex with Alfred the Great. And I'll read you the back of the book here. In the middle years of the 9th century, the fierce Danes, whenever you hear Danes, just think Vikings, stormed onto British soil, hungry for spoils and conquest. Kingdom after kingdom fell to the ruthless invaders until but one realm remained. And suddenly the fate of all England and the course of history depended upon one man, one king, Alfred the Great. From the New York Times best-selling storyteller Bernard Cornwell comes a rousing epic adventure of courage, treachery, duty, devotion, majesty, love, and battle as seen through the eyes of a young warrior who straddled two worlds. And that is definitely what you've got going on here. Uhtred of Bebbanburg is born as the prince and the heir apparent to the castle Bebbanburg in the north of England. And he's a young boy when his father goes out to meet the Danes, and his father is defeated ignominiously and killed. And Uhtred is captured by the Danes. He's captured by the Danish Viking Ragnar. And at the same time, his uncle betrays him and takes over the castle, his inheritance of Bebbanburg. And Uhtred is then raised as a Dane by Ragnar. But due to the vagaries of fate, as Bernard Cornwell likes to say throughout his novels here in the Saxon Tales, weird beeth full which just means fate is strange. Even though he's now been raised as a Dane and thinks of himself as a Dane and is proud of his Danish heritage that he's gotten from Ragnar, he finds himself fighting for King Alfred on the side of the Saxons when he was born as a Saxon. And he has to struggle between these two worlds throughout these 13 novels, but comes to realize that he really needs to fight on the side of the Saxons, and he's actually on their sides because the Vikings are just a bunch of pillaging, murdering, raping, rampaging SOBs, which they were. I mean, and Bernard Cornwell puts all that historical accuracy of the Vikings and their depredations upon England during these Viking invasions into these books. And it's just horrific. But the tales are fantastic. They're extremely well done. It's just a joy to read these books, all of them. And they're very good, very well done with Uhtred and his retinue of warriors that he takes with him during these wars with King Alfred, and his relationship with King Alfred as the person behind the scenes, kind of driving these victories forward as Wessex comes back from near defeat in order to try to start to unite England. And it's a great series. They made a Netflix series off of it as well. There were at least 5 seasons on the Netflix series, and the Netflix series was very high production values, had a lot of money behind it, and the first couple of seasons in that series are excellent, particularly up to when Alfred dies, and the season right after Alfred dies is pretty good as well. And then after that, I think the actors started phoning it in a bit, but it was really well done. So that's our first contender here in the Octagon, Uhtred of Bebbanburg. And his opponent here in the red trunks on the other side of the ring is Colonel Richard Sharpe of the 95th Rifles Regiment. And he is the main character in the Sharpe series of books, which were 24 books starting in 1981 and then up to 1997 is when I think the last of those books was written. And again, I've read all of these books as well, and they're also fantastic. But Colonel Richard Sharpe, his first novel, not in the sequence that Bernard Cornwell wrote them. He wrote them out of chronological order, even though it's following the career of Sir Arthur Wellesley, the Duke of Wellington. But the first one chronologically, in terms of the period, was Sharpe's Tiger, where Sir Arthur Wellesley is in India, starting his military career in India. And you've got Colonel Sharpe, actually he's a private in this book when he starts. And I'll read you the back of this one. "It was bloody awful shot," Sharpe said. "My mother could lay a gun better than that. I didn't think you had a mother," Private Garrard said. "Everyone's got a mother, Tom." "Not Sergeant Hakeswell," Garrard said, then spat a mix of dust and spittle. "Hakeswell was spawned of the devil." "Richard Sharpe, soldier, hero, rogue, the man you always want on your side. Born in poverty, he joined the army to escape jail and climbed the ranks by sheer brutal courage. He knows no other family than the regiment of the 95th Rifles, whose green jacket he proudly wears." And he's a member of the 95th Rifles, and this is a new sort of experimental regiment. They actually have rifled rifles, meaning the barrels are rifled so that the guns will shoot farther and more accurately than the muskets of the traditional soldier in the British Army. And since they can't though, however, be shot as quickly, they can't be reloaded as quickly. And for that reason, this unit gets used as scouts and is sort of a special unit in the Army. And Bernard Cornwell takes full advantage of that to use this 95th Rifle Regiment as sort of a special forces operation in the Imperial British Army during the Napoleonic Wars. And again, this is Bernard Cornwell following the career of the Duke of Wellington all the way from when he starts in India to the culmination in the Battle of Waterloo. And there are 24 novels in this series. And they eventually they follow sort of that chronological order, but they're written out of order. But again, this Sharpe's Tiger is the first one with Colonel Richard Sharpe, Private Richard Sharpe at this point, starting off his career in India. And they are wonderful as well. Excellent, excellent stories. Richard Sharpe is just a fascinating character, and his platoon of troops that he has around them are very well developed, and the characters and the personalities that Bernard Cornwell builds into these characters that he writes along with Colonel Richard Sharpe are very enjoyable to read as you trace the career of the Duke of Wellington, Sir Arthur Wellesley, all the way from India up to the climatic battle with Napoleon at Waterloo. And they're very, very good. And this was also adapted into a TV series by BBC. It was Sharpe's Rifles, the TV series starring Sean Bean. It is much lower production values than the Netflix series on Uhtred, but the stories are very good. The acting is great. And Sean Bean, while not being my favorite actor, I think Sean Bean was born to play the role of Richard Sharpe. And despite the low budget for this BBC television series, it's very entertaining. I like it a lot. So those are our 2 contestants. They're in the Octagon. Is one of them better than the other? Does one stand head and shoulders above the other? And the answer to that question, again, I think is yes. And the one that is the victor in this celebrity death match is Colonel Richard Sharpe. Hands down, Not even a contest, in my opinion. I love both these tales. They're both great. I recommend them highly. I would not to steer you away from Uhtred of Bebbanburg. Those are fantastic stories. But if you could have had the time to only read one of these characters, I would recommend Richard Sharpe. And the reason I recommend Richard Sharpe is because these are historical novels that Bernard Cornwell has researched just with an enormous amount of depth and detail that he's put all into these books. And because he's writing about Colonel Richard Sharpe in the Napoleonic era versus Uhtred of Bebbanburg back in the Dark Ages, or as England is just emerging from the Dark Ages, he has a wealth more of information that he can work with culturally and with all of the details of historical details that he can put into the Richard Sharpe series that you just don't have with the Saxon Tales. The Saxon Tales, the culture is pretty much all the same, dirt poor, living in mud and scraping out an existence. And then here in the Napoleonic Wars, you just have this wealth of cultural information, this wealth of military information, of the different uniforms of the military and the units, the different types of units that he has to work with. He's got infantry, dragoons, artillery, all of the different styles, the different weapons, the actual historical events of the battles, the actual officers who are fighting in those battles, who he works into the books. And it's just fantastic. And it gives it a richness and a depth that just isn't there, that he doesn't have to work with Uhtred of Bebbanburg. And Richard Sharpe himself, I think, is a much more character with much more depth than Uhtred. He's got a lot more variability to his personality and his squadron of men that he builds around them. All of their characters are much more well developed than Uhtred's companions in the Saxon Tales, in my opinion. And it makes for much better storytelling. And one of the things that I really enjoyed about reading this series here by Bernard Cornwell is as you're going through these books, you're not entirely sure as you're reading the book which parts of it are fiction and which parts of it are historical fact. And then when you get to the back of the book in the notes, Bernard Cornwell will clue you in as to what parts were fictional that he added in and then which parts were historical. And frequently you'll be reading these books and you're like, oh, there's no way that happened. This is one of the things that he built in as a fictional tale in order to spice it up. And then you find out, no, that actually happened. It's historically accurate. And I'll give you one example. So here in Sharpe's Tiger, they're storming a fort in India. And there's a Highlander officer who grabs a scaling ladder, throws it up against the wall of this fort in India, goes up it by himself with nothing but a claymore sword, gets to the top, and the Indian troops defending it throw him off of this 15-foot wall down onto the rocks below. He gets himself back up, puts the climbing ladder, the storming ladder, back up against the wall, goes back up with it, pulls out his claymore broadsword, and then kills everybody on top of the wall in order to clear the path for the rest of the Highlanders to then storm the fort. I'm like, there's no way that's real. And it turns out it was, and the man won I don't know if it was a Victoria Cross, but won an award for it. He cites the valor, the citation for valor that this officer got. And it's just packed with all those kinds of details. And it's those details and that amount of depth and richness that you get to it that just makes the Sharpe series, in my opinion, stand head and shoulders above Uhtred of Bebbanburg. Although I love them both. But that's it. That's our Celebrity Deathmatch. I think this makes Celebrity Deathmatch number 3. We did Isaac Asimov and Robert A. Heinlein. And we did the cover artists, the science fiction and fantasy cover artists, Boris Vallejo and Frank Frazetta. I'll link those down below. And I'll probably make a playlist for these now that I've got 3 of them. But that's it. That's our Celebrity Deathmatch. We're going to raise the hand on Colonel Richard Sharpe here as the victor. And with that, I'm going to say take care, be safe, and I'll catch you guys next time.